The Afro-American Baptist minister and journalist George Washington Williams visited the Belgian King Leopold II in 1889, a man he was very much impressed by. At the time, Leopold was busy with getting the Arab slave trade abolished in the eastern Congo, boasting about the improvements in the quality of life his subjects in the Congo underwent, and he even invited Williams to travel to the Congo and see for himself. Williams accepted the invitation, but when he arrived he found the state of affairs much different than Leopold described, so he wrote a letter addressing his good and great friend Leopold II. Good and great friend. It afforded me great pleasure to avail myself of the opportunity afforded me last year of visiting your state in Africa, and how thoroughly I've been disenchanted, disappointed and disheartened. Instead of the natives of the Congo adopting the fostering care of your majesty's government, they everywhere complain that their land has been taken from them by force, that their government is cruel and arbitrary, and declare that they neither love nor respect the government and its flag. Your majesty's government has sequestered their land, burned their towns, stolen their property, enslaved their women and children, and commenced other crimes too numerous to mention in detail. Mr. H.M. Stanley, the man who was your chief agent in setting up your authority in this country, has grossly misrepresented the character of the country. And all this upon the word of honor of a gentleman, I subscribe myself your majesty humble and obedient servant, G.O.W. Williams, Stanley Falls, Central Africa. When we judge people from the past, and especially rulers, we should think about how much we can hold someone accountable. Yes, in the Congo everything was done in Leopold's name, but that does not necessarily imply that he holds all of the blame. Someone can only be truly held accountable for both what he was aware of, his own actions, and the systems he put into place. When we talk about, for example, Hitler and the Holocaust, we know that it was a system explicitly designed to kill people. Hitler was 100% responsible. The massive industrialization campaign in China, the Great Leap Forward by Mao Zedong, killed many more people, but for a large part it seems to stem from Mao's failing economic system and personal incompetence. Is Mao still to blame, even though he did not have the intent to kill this many people? Well, yes, of course, he still is responsible. Without him, this would not have happened, or at least not to this scale. But the scenario becomes less clear in other examples. Can we blame the ministers in the British Imperial government for the expansion of the British settlers over the Appalachian Mountains and the displacement of some American natives, even though Britain explicitly prohibited this? Can we blame the same ministers for the Australian frontier wars against Australian Aboriginals, even though local governors were explicitly instructed to live in amity and kindness with indigenous Australians and to avoid conflict, yet local decision makers simply did not listen to Britain on this matter? Historical accounts say that Leopold II was truly shocked when he got the letter from George W. Williams and heard the news about the cruelty happening in his realm, and immediately called for a meeting with his trusted advisors on how this could have happened. Leopold II sometimes is placed quite high on the tier list of worst or best scoring genociders in history, but he himself has never been to the Congo. Should we blame him for everything that has happened in his name? This video will not give you a simple yes or no answer, or even give you a percentage of accountability, but we will talk about how much Leopold did know and what actions he took regarding the Congo, so you yourself can develop an informed opinion on how much Leopold II was truly to blame. First, we should have a look at how Leopold acquired the Congo. Most of the coastal areas of West Africa were already settled with European trading posts, and even the transatlantic slave trade was already abolished. The coast of Central Africa was already explored for centuries, including some of the estuaries of the large rivers. Yet the interior of Central Africa remained a mystery, hence the name given to this area, the Dark Continent. One of the first European explorers trying to reach the heart of Africa was the legendary British explorer David Livingstone, but he did not start his expedition from the west, but instead from the east. Eastern Africa at the time was already colonized, but most of it not by Europeans, but by Arab slavers. These Arab-led cities were used as supply bases for the European expeditions, even though the European explorers, especially Livingstone, detested slavery. Livingstone became obsessed with finding the source of the Nile River. Academic opinion at the time thought the Nile River originated from Lake Albert or Victoria. Livingstone, in contrast, thought the source of the Nile would be more to the south, such as the Galuba River in the Congo. Livingstone fell terribly ill during this expedition and lost contact with the outside world for years. In a 6-year period of the 44 letters he wrote and sent, only one made it to Zanzibar. Many presumed he was dead. A daring American newspaper, the New York Herald, sent an expedition in the hope to find and rescue Livingstone. They sent a man not that well known at the time, but whose name would forever be cemented in the history books: Henry Morton Stanley. Surprising many, he did manage to find Livingstone in the city of Ujiji, near the border of modern Tanzania, Burundi and Congo, where Livingstone arrived just a day prior. He met Livingstone with the now legendary words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume," knowing full well that they were the only two white people in an unexplored area surrounding them stretching thousands of kilometers. Stanley's reputation too became legendary, and upon returning to Europe he was quickly hired by King Leopold II to explore and exert control of the Congo in his name. But Leopold's grip on Central Africa was far from set. Other major colonial powers also had their eyes on the region. Especially France had explorers actively working in the Congo, setting up their own outposts. This is where the true diplomatic genius of Leopold II came to show. Even before Leopold's claims were recognized, he set up an international organization called the International Association for the Exploration and Civilization of Central Africa, or the International African Association in short, and a different front organization, the International Association of the Congo, a couple years later. Both were chaired by Leopold, but the International African Association had multiple countries having their own committees in the association. It had clear altruistic, scientific and humanitarian goals to open up Central Africa to the rest of the world, to bring civilization through government and judicial institutions, and to bring Christianity. Its founding was welcomed across the Western world. The fact that there were two similar organizations was intentionally planned by Leopold. One had clear check and balances, input from other countries and reporting requirements, but the other one didn't. What the exact responsibilities were of each organization was very complicated, set up so that Leopold could retain much more control than he was originally intended to have. It was so unknown in fact that even Stanley, the chief operator in the Congo, was unsure if he was on the payroll of the International African Association, the International Association of the Congo, or on the payroll of Leopold himself. All European workers in the organization were also forbidden by contract to disclose the nature of their work. The scramble of Africa was starting to get into full swing, with the French flag being raised in Brazzaville and Portugal claiming all of the coast south of the French territory. Even if Leopold would get part of the Congo, he would be out of a coastline. In 1884, the Berlin Conference was organized to regulate and cooperate on the scramble of Africa between the European powers. All of the major and colonial powers attended the Berlin Conference, but Belgium did not attend, nor did Leopold II, but his organization, the International Association of the Congo, did. Of course, even though Leopold was not himself present in Berlin representing the association, he was the one really in control. More colonial powers were interested in the region, but Leopold was able to convince most of the attending powers that his association should rule the Congo, making the Congo a free trading area. At the time, most colonies were financed by the import and export tariffs levied upon goods going to and out of the colony. This money was used to run the colonial government, army and judicial system. Yet even with these tariffs, most colonies were unprofitable. Leopold promised to make a Congo a free trading area, thus not levying any of the common import and export tariffs and allowing all other powers to freely trade within the Congo. This plan was able to convince most countries, and especially Britain was happy that the region would not go to France instead. France, however, was not happy. They were the primary competing power for the region and obviously would not be content with a neutral free trading zone. Thus France got the concession of a small part of the Congo, with the rest going to Leopold. These two Congos now resemble the modern borders of the Republic of Congo, a former French territory, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, the former territory of Leopold II. There was one catch, however, because besides the low amount of revenue Leopold was able to expect, he also had to sign a clause that in the case of a bankruptcy of the association, the Congo would fully be inherited by France. At the time of the scramble of Africa and the Berlin Conference, the transatlantic slave trade was long gone, and the European public overall was sternly anti-slavery. The Berlin Conference thus too had a very explicit anti-slavery aim. All participating powers adopted a general resolution which aimed to end slavery by African and Arab powers, and all powers promised to bring the slave trade in the respective spheres of influence to an end. Livingstone, now already a decade since his passing, still played a big role in the Berlin Conference, because it were both his expeditions which opened up the Congo to the rest of the world, and it were his writings on the absolute horrors and the human rights abuses of the Arab slave trade, which had a huge impact on the European, but especially British public opinion. The Congo and the Congo Association played a star role in this aim to end slavery in Africa, as central and eastern Congo was the epicenter of the Arab slave trade, and the conference saw Leopold II as the man who would be able to bring this to fruition. Stanley was put on the payroll of Leopold and put in charge of both exploring the Congo and putting it firmly under Leopold's control, establishing outposts, signing treaties with African tribes, and even going as far as to get those concessions by doing tricks with car batteries, acting like he has supernatural powers. The Congo Free Trade was steadily growing, but Stanley was seriously misinforming Leopold about some fundamental issues, writing that local cultures demand harsh physical punishment to get them to work harder, and that there were no advanced forms of governments present in Central Africa. Yes, there were no government forms as advanced vast as those in mainland Europe, but it's also not true that they were just hunter and gatherer tribes. There were kings and official governments who held diplomatic relations with each other. As the colonies steadily grew, there was one major returning problem: a lack of funds. All colonies were just starting out or losing money, but the prohibition on import and export tariffs were hurting significantly. And there was no state to fund the project, only King Leopold's personal wealth, which was running out quickly. He himself personally got into much financial trouble and made huge cuts to his personal expenses. Even his children stopped taking an allowance. Stanley in his letters continuously complained about the lack of funds to properly set up shop, and that the civilian administrators coming into the Congo were, due to lack of pay, adventurers and opportunists, not competent bureaucrats. Leopold's dreams of his own place in the sun seemed to be slipping away. His Congo state was almost broke, most of his country was unmapped and had little proven commercial value. Cecil Rhodes and his South Africa were eyeing on the southern parts of the Congo, and the interior of the Congo was under the control of the Arab slave traders and sultans who would have to be defeated by force in a very expensive military campaign. And there were even stories of ivory shortages due to overhunting, even though Leopold's rule was just established a couple of years ago. But Leopold was above all a man who dreamt big, and under pressure of the increasingly popular French Cardinal Charles Laviguerie, who managed to draw huge crowds with his personal anti-slavery crusade and the UK government, Leopold organized the Brussels Anti-Slavery Conference in 1889. All Western powers signed an agreement to put an end to black slave trade by land as well as by sea, and to improve the moral and material conditions of the existence of the native races in Africa. Leopold argued that he would love nothing more than to end slavery in Central Africa, but he needed more money, and he argued for an introduction of his right to levy import tariffs in order to get enough funds to do so. Britain was quick to agree, but many other powers did not. Yet Leopold was able to convince them. Later he enacted decrees that all uninhabited or uncultivated lands would be property of the state, which was the vast majority of the country, and that local citizens would only be allowed to sell product, mostly rubber and ivory, to the Congo Free State, effectively ending the principle of free trade in the Congo by a loophole. And since people in the Congo couldn't pay taxes, the concept of money was often too foreign to them, Leopold introduced a system of forced labor as a means to pay taxes, effectively introducing a form of serfdom. He also sold huge territorial economic concessions to private companies who had very little oversight and would be able to use this forced labor in their own production. And to reduce costs and increase profitability, he tied up pay for his leading local government officials based on how much money they were able to extract, granting those officials almost absolute powers. We can now see where the entire system is starting to go wrong. Congo had an independent judicial system, but it was severely underfunded due to cash shortages. The total lack of oversight and check and balances was a feature, not a bug. Leopold specifically set up his institutions in this manner to avoid foreign interference and increase its own control. The financial incentives for bureaucrats also definitely did not help the situation. The system was so overstretched that the largest province in Congo was the size of France, and such a province was under the control by just one responsible government official who had almost absolute control and was incentivized to extract as much money as possible from the area. The abuses happening in the Congo are too horrific to just gloss over quickly in this video, so we won't go over it in great detail, but the stories coming out of the Congo were unprecedented in its cruelty for European colonies in the time period. We should note that this cruelty was not happening in the entirety of the Congo. Different actors and companies did different things, with the most horrifying stories coming from a northern concession to the ABAR company in dark red on this map. When the stories came out of the atrocities in the Congo, Leopold was in fact as surprised as everyone else on how this could have happened. Leopold made orders to improve the situation for the local people, but he did not make any significant funding available to actually make any change. And for his own report, he had his findings suppressed. This report only became public in 1980 and is to date one of the most informative reports on the Congo atrocities. However, Leopold did not only do bad things. He was able to turn Congo into a profitable enterprise and used his profits to build beautiful buildings, parks, churches, museums and galleries all across Belgium. Leopold at the time even got the nickname the Builder King. And even in the Congo, he was able to build up infrastructure across the country, bring healthcare and modern medicine, and made good on his promise to end the Arab slave trade in another brilliant diplomatic masterplay, where he made the largest Arab slave trader, Tipu Tip, his governor of Eastern Congo, and made him establish the Belgian outpost before turning onto the slave traders and ending the Arab slave trade once and for all with a quick war using the previously established infrastructure and map knowledge. Now that we've discussed the Congo and how it went wrong in depth, how responsible should we hold Leopold for the abuses that happened there? On the one hand, he never personally ordered any of the abuses or knew about them happening prior to it becoming known to the whole world. He also was able to open up one of the most inhospitable places to the rest of the world, and he did abolish the gruesome Arab slave trade, where prior to Leopold, a slave would be approximately the same price as a simple pair of shoes. On the other hand, it is hard to justify any excuses for the abuses which took place. Leopold was the one who built up the institutions which were responsible for the situation going wrong, even if it were unintentional by him. And when the news eventually broke, he was shocked, but he did not seem willing to forgo big parts of his control and profits in order to improve the situation. What do you think? Is Leopold II responsible for the atrocities in the Congo? Or if not fully, to what degree? And does the Belgian royal family admit to that role? Let me know what you think down in the comments and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this video. Perhaps the best illustration for the duality of Leopold II's reign is the independence ceremony of the Congo in 1960. Before signing the independence declaration, a ceremony was held with both Belgian and future Congolese government officials, including the Belgian king, Baudouin. King Baudouin held a speech praising Leopold II for bringing civilization, infrastructure, healthcare, education and much more to the Congo. He said that Belgium for 80 years sent their best sons to Africa to bring down the horrible slave trade and to bring together all the Central African tribes which used to be enemies under one banner. He was followed by a speech from Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of Congo, whose tone was the exact opposite. That the Congolese were oppressed and that now for the first time they would finally get their liberty.